A Waitoa man who shot and killed another hunter in the Kaimai-Mamaku range on Easter Monday. He's been described as a decent person who did a tragic and stupid thing. 37-year-old Quentin McCreedy was convicted in the Hamilton District Court today of a careless use of a firearm, causing the death of a 57-year-old, Gordon Leach. He's been sentenced to 6 months community detention with a nighttime curfew, 1 year's suspension, 200 hours of community work, and ordered to pay reparation of $10,000. Our Waikato reporter Andrew McRae was in court.
Quentin McCreedy was out hunting stags when he heard a crashing sound ahead of him. His lawyer Roger Laybourne told the court that McCreedy was unaware Mr Leach was in the area.
They used their calls to call a stag or a hind, and the noise and the movement of Mr McCreedy, in my client's view, was consistent with a deer that was approaching him, and the fact that he then sighted a brown-coloured object coming towards them. He genuinely thought he had sighted a deer.
Mr Laybourne said while Mr Leach was not wearing any high-vis gear, his client had never disputed the fact that he didn't properly identify his target.
I want to make it abundantly clear that no blame can be placed on Mr Leach for not wearing high-vis hunting clothing. He's entitled to wear what clothing he feels is appropriate. And the only reason I'm mentioning this, ma'am, is that the colour of the clothing is relevant to the degree of carelessness.
He acknowledged a text sent to McCreedy from some of Mr Leach's family, which reached out to him in a conciliatory and humane fashion.
It is just an enormous tragedy for all, but particularly Mrs Leach and her family.
The family had indicated to the court it didn't want McCreedy going to jail, but the police did. Prosecuting Sergeant Mark Hepworth asked for between 6 and 9 months behind bars.
To reflect the seriousness of the charge and the fact that police don't want it to happen again. Obviously, Mr McCreedy accepts the fact that he didn't identify the target, and that is, if it's not the golden rule of hunting, it is certainly one of 2 or 3 golden rules of all firearm use.
Judge Rosemary Riddell described Gordon Leach's death as senseless.
The tragedy of this case is that a life has been taken. A family have been left and lost a dearly beloved husband, father and grandfather. And their sense of guilt is compounded by the senselessness of Gordon Leach's death.
The judge told McCreedy he had relied too heavily on his belief the target was a deer and then made an extremely poor decision.
You believed that you had sighted a deer. The distance between you and the victim was about 26 metres. You fired your gun and then you heard the victim call out, "I've been shot." Mr Leach died at the scene as the result of injuries to his torso.
Judge Riddell agreed with McCreedy that he had stag fever at the time and was too eager to get a deer. She stopped short of sending him to prison because he was totally remorseful and his carelessness was out of character.
You have your own kind of prison sentence, I suspect, with the knowledge that you will always carry this and the knowledge that you've taken a life.
The court heard that Quentin McCreedy is unlikely to ever go hunting again. In Hamilton for Checkpoint, Ko Andrew McRae.